I should have known my wedding night would end in rain instead of vows. At 11:47 p.m., I was standing barefoot on Madison Avenue in a dress that had cost more than my car, watching the white satin cling to my skin like a beautiful mistake I couldn't peel off. The bouquet was gone. One heel had snapped somewhere between the ballroom and the sidewalk. My mascara had long since surrendered, tracing cold paths down my cheeks as yellow cab lights blurred past me in streaks of gold and red. Behind me, somewhere 12 blocks uptown, a string quartet was probably still playing for guests who had no idea the bride had walked out before the first dance. Or maybe they knew. Maybe they were already whispering about it over champagne and tiny desserts I'd helped choose 3 months ago when I still believed Ethan Cole loved me more than he loved his father's money. I wrapped my arms around myself and kept walking, even though I had no plan, no coat, and exactly $14 in my clutch. The city smelled like wet pavement, gasoline, and the kind of disappointment that settles into your bones. Rain hammered the avenue in silver sheets, soaking the lace train behind me until it dragged like an anchor. Every few steps, I had to lift the skirt just to keep from tripping. My phone buzzed again inside my bag. Ethan, then my mother, then Ethan again. I didn't need to read the messages to know what they said. Come back. Don't embarrass the family. This is a misunderstanding. You're overreacting. Funny how people always call betrayal a misunderstanding when it doesn't happen to them. I had seen enough in that hotel corridor to know exactly what kind of man I was supposed to marry. The lipstick on his collar, the hand at another woman's waist, the calm, irritated way he said my name when he realized I was there, as if I were the one ruining his evening. So I had turned around, walked through a lobby full of crystal and judgment, and stepped into the storm before anyone could stop me. At first, the rain felt like punishment. By the time I reached 52nd Street, it felt like proof I was still alive. A black car appeared beside me so quietly I almost didn't notice it until the headlights washed over my dress. Long, sleek, expensive in the way that didn't ask for attention because it owned it already. It rolled to a stop at the curb, tires hissing against the flooded street. I kept walking. New York teaches women not to trust cars that stop for them after midnight. Then the rear door opened. Not cracked open. Opened fully, with the slow precision of someone who had never rushed a day in his life. Warm amber light spilled onto the sidewalk. I froze. A man stepped out, tall enough that he had to duck slightly beneath the roofline. Black coat, dark hair damp at the temples, shoulders broad under tailored wool. He looked like he belonged to another version of the city, one built behind locked doors and whispered names. When his eyes found mine, the rain, the traffic, the whole restless avenue seemed to pull back half a step. He didn't smile, didn't crowd me, just stood there with one hand on the open door and said, in a voice low enough to cut through the storm, "Get in, sweetheart. You're not safe out here." I did not move. Rain slid down my face, into my mouth, cold and metallic, but I could still hear every beat of my own heart. He stood there like he had stepped out of another life entirely, one where men did not ask twice, and the world usually answered yes before they finished speaking. Up close, he looked even more dangerous for how calm he was. Not loud, not arrogant, just certain. His dark coat was untouched by panic, his expression unreadable, and something about that perfect control made the storm around us feel suddenly small. I tightened my grip on my clutch and took one step back. "I am fine," I said, which was ridiculous because I was standing barefoot in a wedding dress at midnight, shaking so hard my teeth nearly clicked together. His gaze dropped briefly to my bare feet, then to the traffic light changing above us, then over my shoulder. Not a curious glance, a measuring one. "No," he said quietly. "You are not." There was no sympathy in his voice, which somehow made me trust him more than false kindness would have. I opened my mouth to tell him to leave me alone, but headlights turned the corner behind me, slow and deliberate, and my stomach dropped so fast I felt it in my knees. A silver sedan. Familiar. Ethan's brother drove a silver sedan. I did not need to see the plate to know that car had not found me by accident. The man in front of me noticed the change in my face before I could hide it. His eyes sharpened just slightly. "That is your answer, then," he said, as if the approaching car had confirmed something for him. "Get in." I should have run. I should have crossed the street, flagged a cab, disappeared into the subway, done anything that made sense in the world I understood. Instead, I looked from the silver sedan to the open door behind him, to the warm leather interior glowing like a promise I knew better than to believe. The sedan slowed. My pulse climbed into my throat. Claire. My name stopped me colder than the rain had. I stared at him. I had never seen this man before in my life. He must have read the question in my face, because his expression did not change at all. You can be angry about that later, he said. Right now, choose quickly. The silver sedan rolled closer to the curb. I saw two silhouettes in front. One turned his head toward me. That was all it took. I gathered the soaked skirt in both hands and slid into the car. Warmth hit me first, then the scent of leather, cedar, and something darker I could not place. He shut the door behind me with a soft, final sound that felt far louder than it should have. A second later he was inside too, taking the seat across from me in the rear as if he preferred to keep me where he could see me. The driver pulled away from the curb with eerie smoothness. Outside, the silver sedan tried to follow for half a block before another black vehicle appeared from nowhere and settled neatly between us like a closing gate. I stared through the rain-streaked glass, breath caught tight in my chest. Who are you? I asked. He removed one black leather glove, then the other, movements slow and precise. Strong hands. No ring. No wasted motion. Adrian Moretti, he said. The name meant nothing to me and everything to the driver, whose shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly the second he heard it spoken aloud. Adrian watched me, with the stillness of someone used to being watched first. And before you ask your next question, he added, yes, I know exactly whose wedding you just left. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with my wet dress. How? He looked out at the city sliding past in blurred gold and red. Because, Claire Bennett, the man you almost married made a very expensive mistake. The city blurred past in ribbons of rain and light, but all I could see was Adrian Moretti sitting across from me like he had not just spoken a sentence that turned my blood to ice. A very expensive mistake. The words settled heavily between us, too polished to be casual, too deliberate to ignore. I pressed my wet clutch against my lap and tried to slow my breathing. The heat inside the car was beginning to thaw my skin, which only made me more aware of how exposed I was. My dress clung to me. My hair was half falling out of its pins, and I was trapped in the back of a luxury car with a man who knew my full name, my wedding, and apparently more about my life than I did. You keep talking like I am part of some business deal, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I am not. Adrian did not interrupt. He waited, watching me with that unnerving stillness that made every word feel important before it was even spoken. Then explain why you know who I am, I said. Explain why my almost husband is a mistake, and explain why I should not ask this driver to stop the car right now. At that, the driver glanced once in the mirror, then quickly looked away again. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. You can ask him, Adrian said calmly. He will not. I hated that answer because I knew it was true before I even tested it. The car turned downtown, smooth as silk, tires whispering over wet pavement. Neon washed across the tinted windows and disappeared. Outside, Manhattan looked restless and glittering and ordinary. Inside, it felt like the whole world had narrowed to one man and the questions I was not sure I wanted answered. Adrian leaned back slightly, one arm resting against the dark leather seat. 3 months ago, he said, Ethan, Cole signed papers connected to a real estate acquisition in Brooklyn. I frowned. I work in event marketing. I do not know anything about his business. No, Adrian said. That was the point. A chill moved through me, sharper than the rain had been. What point? His eyes held mine. They were not cold, exactly, just controlled, like a locked room with something dangerous inside. Your name was added to a secondary trust tied to the acquisition after your engagement announcement. Quietly, efficiently, with the assumption that by tonight, you would be legally attached to his family and no one would look too closely. My mouth went dry. That does not make any sense. It makes perfect sense, he said. If you are the kind of man who thinks a wedding ring is the same thing as permission. I stared at him, every instinct pulling in two directions at once. Part of me wanted to call him a liar. The other part remembered the financial documents Ethan always brushed off when I walked into the room. The whispered phone calls. The way his father had smiled at me like I was a lovely detail already accounted for. You were saying they were using me. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened, like the truth mattered to him more than comfort. I am saying your signature would have mattered very much by Monday morning. I looked down at my hands. My engagement ring was still there, a perfect oval diamond catching the amber light in cruel little flashes. Suddenly, it looked less like love and more like evidence. I pulled it off with fingers that trembled only once and held it tightly in my palm. How do you know any of this? I whispered. For the first time since I had entered the car, Adrian looked away. Not for long. Just long enough to glance at the rain running down the glass beside him. Because the property Ethan tried to bury your name inside borders one of mine. His voice stayed low, measured, but underneath it I heard something harder. Personal. And because I do not appreciate strangers building schemes that touch my business. I should have been relieved. The explanation was almost reasonable in a terrifying kind of way. Instead, a new fear took shape. So this is not about helping me, I said softly. It is about protecting yourself. Adrian looked back at me then, and whatever I expected to see in his face was not what I found. There was no apology there. No denial either. Only that same impossible calm, wrapped around something I could not yet name. It started that way, he said. Then his gaze moved over my soaked dress, my bare feet tucked beneath ruined satin, the ring clenched in my fist like a tiny weapon I had turned on myself. His voice dropped even lower. Then I saw you standing alone in the rain. His words should not have mattered. That was the ridiculous part. Not after everything I had heard in the last 10 minutes. Not after learning that my engagement had been turned into paperwork, that my name had been folded into someone else's ambition like I was a signature waiting to happen instead of a woman with a pulse and a voice and a right to know what was being done in my name. I should have held on to my anger, because anger was familiar. Anger kept me upright. Anger had gotten me out of that hotel. But there was something in the way Adrian said it that unsettled me more than any threat could have. Then I saw you standing alone in the rain. Not possessive, not theatrical, just true. I looked down at the ring in my palm and felt suddenly exhausted in a way no amount of sleep could fix. The diamond caught the light one last time before I curled my fingers over it. Where are you taking me? I asked. Adrian answered without hesitation. Somewhere warm. It was such a simple response that I almost laughed. A man like him probably had a different definition of simple than the rest of us. Still, the car kept moving south, away from Midtown, away from the hotel, away from the version of my life that had cracked open before dessert was even served. We passed blocks I knew and blocks I did not. The city outside shifting from polished storefronts and glowing lobbies to quieter streets lined with old brick and guarded entrances. I watched people through the rain-soft glass, couples hurrying under umbrellas, delivery guys on electric bikes, women in sneakers carrying takeout bags, ordinary lives continuing under the same storm that had swallowed mine whole. It felt impossible that the world had not stopped. You said Ethan made a mistake, I said after a long silence. Was the mistake trying to use my name, or was the mistake getting caught by you? Adrian's mouth moved, not quite a smile. Both. The answer was so blunt I almost hated him for it. And what happens now? He folded his gloves neatly beside him before speaking, every movement controlled, every detail precise. Now, your phone stays off. You do not answer calls from Ethan, his family, your attorney, or anyone you do not know personally and trust completely. My attorney? I repeated. I do not even have an attorney. Adrian's gaze held mine. You might by morning. A sharp little pulse of fear moved through me. You say things like that as if this is normal. For me it is, he said. No apology. No softening. Just the truth laid cleanly between us. I turned toward the window, because for 1 second I could not stand how steady he was while everything in me still shook. My reflection stared back in the glass, pale and ghost-like, veil gone, lipstick faded, hair falling loose in damp curls around a face I barely recognized. I looked less like a bride than a woman who had walked out of a fire no one else could see. The car slowed before a wrought iron gate set into a stone wall I had never noticed before, even though I had probably passed this block 100 times in my life. The gates opened before we fully stopped. Of course they did. Nothing in Adrian Moretti's world seemed built to wait. We moved through a private courtyard, past trimmed hedges glistening under the rain, and came to a stop beneath a covered entrance framed by warm golden lanterns. The building beyond was old New York wealth, all limestone and silence, The kind of place that did not need to announce itself because everyone important already knew the address. My breath caught as the driver stepped out and another man appeared under the awning with an umbrella already open, as if my arrival had been expected down to the second. I looked back at Adrian. I am not going inside if there are 10 people waiting to ask me questions. No one will ask you anything tonight, he said. Then what will they do? Adrian reached for the door handle. Himself. Rain whispered softly above us, muted now by the roofline. The storm reduced to background music for a life I had not chosen. He opened the door and looked at me with those unreadable dark eyes. They will make sure, he said, his voice low and final, that no one else gets close enough to lie to you again. The moment I stepped out of the car, warmth hit my face from somewhere above the stone entrance, but the rest of me still felt frozen in place. Not from the weather anymore, from the fact that I had crossed some invisible line and knew it. The man holding the umbrella did not look surprised by my appearance, which was almost more unsettling than if he had stared. His gaze flicked once to my soaked dress, my bare feet, the ruined hem trailing rainwater across polished black stone, then returned to a respectful middle distance like discretion had been drilled into him until it became instinct. Adrian stepped out after me, but he did not touch me. He simply stood at my side, tall and composed, while the front doors opened before we reached them. Inside, the house was all warm light and quiet power. Marble floors the color of cream. Dark wood polished to a shine deep enough to reflect movement. A staircase curving upward like something from an old movie about families with too much money and too many secrets. Somewhere farther in, I could hear low voices, the soft clink of dishes being cleared, the faint crackle of a fireplace. Not a mansion built to impress strangers. A fortress built for people who expected the world to come to them. I stopped just inside the doorway, suddenly aware of the water dripping from my dress onto a floor that probably cost more than my first apartment's yearly rent. I am ruining your house, I said before I could stop myself. Adrian took off his coat, handed it to a woman who had appeared from nowhere, and looked at me as if I had said something both absurd and faintly tragic. The house will recover, he said. I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. The woman he had handed the coat to was somewhere in her 50s, elegant in the quiet way women become when they have spent years around money and decided not to perform for it. Silver threaded through her dark hair. Navy dress. Calm eyes that took me in with one glance and gave nothing back except kindness. Miss Bennett, she said gently, as if brides in shock arrived here every Friday night. I am Elena. Come with me. We will get you warm. I looked at Adrian on instinct, which annoyed me because I did not want to be the kind of woman who looked to a man for permission after the night I had just had. He noticed that too, of course. He noticed everything. Go, he said, voice low, almost quiet. No one will disturb you. I should have argued. Asked where my phone was going. Demanded a lock on the door. Demanded proof that I still had choices in a house where doors opened before anyone touched them. Instead, I followed Elena up a side staircase lined with framed black and white photographs, most of them old New York skylines and faceless men in dark suits standing beside cars too expensive for their decade. The guest room she brought me to was larger than my living room and kitchen combined. A fire glowed in the grate. Fresh towels waited on a bench at the foot of the bed. Someone had already laid out clothes on a chair, soft gray cashmere pants, and a cream sweater that looked simple until I got close enough to realize it was probably worth more than my monthly rent. There is a bath if you want one, Elena said. Tea will be brought up in 10 minutes. Dry clothes are there. I had someone send for shoes, but until then, I am afraid slippers will have to do. I stared at her. Does this happen often? For the first time, a real expression touched her face. Something very close to amusement. Not exactly like this. Then, more softly, you are safe here tonight. Safe. That word again. Everybody kept saying it like it could be handed to me by strangers and accepted without question. When Elena left, I stood alone in the middle of the room, listening to the door close with a soft click that should have comforted me and somehow did not. I peeled off the wedding dress slowly, satin clinging at the shoulders, zipper stubborn with damp. When it finally slipped to the floor, I looked down at it pulled around my feet like the ghost of a girl who had believed in the wrong future. I should have cried then. It would have made sense. Instead, I walked to the mirror above the fireplace and saw a woman with wet hair, reddened eyes, and a diamond ring mark still pale on her finger. No husband. No honeymoon. No home I could safely go back to before morning. Just a borrowed room in a stranger's house, and the memory of Adrian Moretti opening a car door in the rain like fate had a driver and knew my name. Then came a knock so soft I almost missed it, followed by Elena's voice from the other side. "Your tea, Miss Bennett." I reached for the robe on the bed, but before I answered, my eyes landed on the folded note resting beside the tray she carried in. One line. No signature. No explanation. Just words written in clean, precise handwriting that made my pulse stumble all over again. "Do not throw the ring away. I will need it by morning." I stared at the note long after Elena left, the porcelain cup warming my hands while my pulse refused to settle. "Do not throw the ring away. I will need it by morning." No signature, but it did not need one. The handwriting was too controlled, too clean, too much like the man downstairs who spoke in facts instead of comfort, and somehow made both feel equally dangerous. I set the tea down untouched and looked at the ring lying beside the tray, a bright little circle under lamplight, innocent if you did not know better. I had wanted to throw it into the Hudson on the drive downtown. Now I wanted answers. That was worse. Anger could keep you moving. Questions made you stay. I slept eventually, but only in pieces. An hour here, 20 minutes there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan in that hotel corridor with his hand at another woman's back. Then the image would shift, and I would see Adrian on the sidewalk, dark coat open, car door waiting, as if the city itself had rearranged around him. At 6:30 in the morning, I gave up pretending rest was possible and crossed to the tall windows overlooking the courtyard. Rain still clung to the stone outside, though the storm had thinned too. A gray mist that softened the world without forgiving it. Men in dark coats moved below with quiet purpose. One opened a gate for a delivery van. Another spoke into an earpiece near the front entrance. Everything below looked orderly, efficient, protected. A house that woke before the sun because danger did not sleep in. I should have called my sister. Lily lived in Hoboken with a husband so steady he alphabetized their spice rack and thought Manhattan was a fun place to visit in daylight. She would have answered on the first ring and come for me in a sweatshirt and rain boots and righteous fury. But Adrian's warning about phones sat uneasily in my mind, and some instinct I could not name told me not to make anyone else part of whatever this had become. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Elena entered with a tray of breakfast and the kind of expression that suggested she already knew I had barely touched the tea. "You should eat," she said, setting down coffee, fruit, and toast arranged more beautifully than any meal had a right to be. "I am not hungry." That has never once stopped the body from needing food. Her tone was so dry that I looked at her properly for the first time and saw the intelligence there, the composure, the complete absence of surprise at human mess. "You have been here a long time," I said. Elena adjusted the silver lid on the tray by half an inch, as if symmetry mattered. "Long enough." I hesitated, then held up the note. "Does he always send instructions with breakfast?" A flicker of something passed through her face. Not quite amusement. More like patience with a question she had expected. "Mr. Moretti prefers clarity. That is one word for it." She met my gaze. "You are still here because he made room for your choices, Miss Bennett. In this house, that matters more than you realize." Before I could decide what that meant, she added, "He has asked if you would join him in the library at 8. Asked, not ordered. That single word should not have relieved me, but it did. "And if I say no?" Elena gave the smallest shrug. "Then breakfast will still be here, and the library will still be downstairs." By 7:58, I was standing outside double walnut doors and borrowed clothes and new flat shoes that fit perfectly, which was unsettling in its own way. Someone had guessed my size overnight. Of course they had. I lifted my hand to knock, but the door opened first. Adrian stood inside by a long table scattered with papers, city maps, and 2 untouched cups of coffee. Morning light came through the tall windows behind him, turning the edges of the room gold while leaving him mostly in shadow. He had traded last night's coat for a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his white shirt open. He looked less like a rescuer now and more like what he probably truly was, a man people made arrangements around. His gaze moved once over me, not lingering, just confirming I was standing and unhurt. "You slept badly," he said. "You sent me legal instructions with tea." For the first time, something almost human touched his mouth. "Fair." He stepped aside and motioned toward the table. "Come here, Claire." I should have hated how easily my name sounded at home in his voice. Instead, I walked forward and saw my engagement photo on top of the papers, smiling and glossy and obscene. Beside it lay a set of documents tabbed in neat black markers, and next to those, a small velvet box open and empty. My ring box. The one Ethan had dropped to one knee with in front of the fountain at Bryant Park while strangers clapped, and I thought the world had just chosen me. Adrian followed my stare. "I need the ring," he said quietly, "because by noon today, Ethan Cole is going to claim you left him in a panic and took property that belongs to his family." For 1 second, I forgot how to breathe. Property. The word hit harder than it should have, maybe because it was so ugly in its honesty. Not bride, not fiancé, not partner. Property. I stared at Adrian across the table, waiting for the punchline, but his expression did not shift. He was not dramatizing. He was informing. "That is insane," I said, though my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. "It is also useful," he replied. "Men like Ethan reveal themselves most clearly when they think embarrassment is the worst thing that can happen to them." I looked down at the engagement photo on the table. Ethan's arm was around my waist, my smile wide and unguarded, the fountain behind us frozen mid-sparkle in the background. I remembered exactly how cold that evening had been, how he had warmed my hands between his and told me I made his life feel simple. I remembered believing him. That hurt more than the lies. Why would he do that? I asked. Why would he say I stole it? Adrian moved one of the folders toward me with 2 fingers, precise and controlled. "Because if you are unstable, then you are unreliable. If you are unreliable, then any questions you ask later can be dismissed as grief, confusion, or revenge." I hated how quickly that made sense. I hated even more that Adrian had known it before I did. "And the ring?" I asked. "The ring matters because gifts above a certain value can become leverage when families with money decide to turn private humiliation into public strategy." His gaze lifted to mine. "If I have it documented, accounted for, and returned through counsel, then he loses one of the cleaner lies available to him." Counsel. Documentation. Accounted for. My ruined wedding had apparently become a legal weather system while I was sleeping in borrowed cashmere upstairs. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the ring there, cool and hard against my fingertips. For a second I did not take it out. It felt like surrender, and I was tired of surrender wearing expensive packaging. Adrian must have seen the hesitation, because his voice changed just slightly when he spoke again. Softer. Not gentle exactly, but closer to it. "Claire." I looked up. Keeping it will not make what he promised true. There it was again, that terrible way he had of speaking directly to the bruise instead of the skin around it. I pulled the ring from my pocket and set it on the table between us. The diamond flashed once in the morning light, then went still. Adrian did not reach for it immediately. He let it sit there, as if allowing me the dignity of having placed it down myself instead of having it taken. Then he picked it up and set it inside the empty velvet box with a care that surprised me. Not because the ring deserved respect, but because I did. The realization unsettled me more than if he had barked. "Orders. What happens after noon?" I asked. Adrian closed the box and rested one hand on it. "After noon, Ethan will realize you are not alone." Something in the room seemed to sharpen around those words. I folded my arms, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the library. "And that is supposed to make me feel better?" "No," he said. "It is supposed to keep him predictable." I exhaled slowly and looked around the room for something ordinary to hold on to. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Old leather chairs. A globe in the corner. A silver pen placed exactly parallel to the edge of the table. Everything in Adrian's world had a place. Meanwhile, I had arrived dripping rainwater and heartbreak onto marble less than 12 hours ago. "I should go home," I said, though even as I said it, the words felt thin. Adrian's eyes did not leave my face. No such a simple word. No raised voice. No explanation at first. Just certainty. My temper flared on instinct. "You do not get to decide that for me." "You are right," he said. "You decide. But first you hear the part no one has told you yet." His hand moved to another folder, darker than the others, unmarked except for my name printed in clean block letters across the tab. Claire Bennett. Seeing my name there sent a pulse of unease through me. Adrian opened it, turned the first page toward me, and tapped a line with one finger. I leaned in. At first, I only saw numbers and addresses and legal language dense enough to drown in. Then one phrase rose from the page and locked every muscle in my body. Contingent spousal authority. That was going to be filed Monday, Adrian said quietly. The moment you were legally married, Ethan would have had access to financial instruments connected to your name, your credit, and the brownstone your grandmother left you in Connecticut. My head snapped up. My grandmother's house. Adrian's gaze held mine, steady and dark and utterly unforgiving. That was the real target, Claire. You were never the prize. You were the key. The key. I sat back so fast the chair legs whispered against the hardwood, and for a second the entire room seemed to tilt around that one terrible sentence. My grandmother's brownstone was the only thing in my life that had ever felt truly mine. Not because it was large or glamorous, because it was neither. It was a narrow brick house on a quiet street in New Haven with uneven floors, stubborn radiators, and a tiny backyard my grandmother had called a garden even when winter stripped it down to dirt. She had left it to me when I was 24, along with a note in her shaky handwriting that said, "Keep one thing in this world that no one can talk you out of." I had cried when I signed the papers. Not because of the property itself, but because it was the last place on earth where I still felt her. The idea of Ethan folding that house into some elegant theft disguised as marriage made something inside me go absolutely still. "No," I said, but it came out like a breath instead of a word. Adrian did not rush to fill the silence. He let me have it, which was somehow kinder than reassurance would have been. I looked down at the document again, at the legal language that had nearly wrapped itself around my future without me ever seeing the rope. "He knew what that house means to me," I whispered. "He stayed there with me last Christmas. He helped me carry boxes down from the attic." My voice fractured on the memory, not because I missed him, but because I hated how thoroughly he had studied the map of what I loved. Adrian's expression hardened in a way I had not seen before, not dramatic, not loud, just colder around the edges. "That is usually how people like him work," he said. "They do not break what matters to you by accident. They inventory it first." The sentence landed with surgical precision. Inventory. Property. Instruments. Every word in Adrian's mouth made betrayal sound less like romance gone wrong and more like a machine I had almost stepped into with white flowers in my hands. I rose from the chair because suddenly sitting felt impossible. I crossed to the nearest window and stared out at the courtyard below, where the last of the rain clung to stone like the city had not quite decided whether to wash itself clean or stay marked. Men moved through the gates with the same quiet purpose as before. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened and closed. Life in this house kept going. Mine had split in half before midnight, and apparently no one was surprised. "Why are you helping me this much?" I asked, still facing the glass. "Be honest." The room behind me went silent enough that I could hear the faint clock ticking on the mantel. When Adrian answered, his voice was closer than I expected, though not close enough to touch. He had crossed part of the room, but not all of it. "Because what Ethan planned intersects my world." He paused once, and I knew there was more before he said it. "And because I do not like watching someone get cornered by people who mistake trust for weakness." I turned then. He stood a few feet away, one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly against the back of the chair I had left. In daylight, he looked even more controlled than he had in the rain, like whatever storms existed in him had been trained to wear expensive suits and wait their turn. "That is not the whole answer," I said. Adrian's gaze met mine, steady and unreadable. "No," he said. "The honesty of that should not have shaken me, but it did. Outside these walls, I had just learned that the man I was supposed to marry had built plans around my life like scaffolding. Inside them, I stood facing another man who clearly had power I did not understand and motives he was only giving me in measured pieces. I should have felt trapped. Instead, I felt the strangest flicker of something I had no business feeling this early in the morning. Not safety exactly. More like the first hard line of truth after a night full of soft lies. "If I go to Connecticut today," I said carefully, "will they follow me there?" Adrian did not hesitate. "Yes. If I stay here, they will still try." My fingers tightened around the window latch. "So either way, this does not end because I walked out of a ballroom." "No," Adrian said quietly. "It ends when they realize you are no longer reachable." Reachable. Another word that should not have made my skin go cold. I turned fully toward him now, pulse unsteady. anger and fear and humiliation moving inside me like weather fronts colliding. You keep talking like I am some asset that needs to be locked down. Adrian's jaw shifted once, the only visible sign that I had hit something real. No, he said. I am talking like someone who knows exactly what kind of men start calling a woman unstable the moment she slips out of their hands. Before I could answer, a knock sounded at the library door. Not loud, just precise. Adrian glanced toward it, and something in his expression changed, not softer, but sharper, like the room had suddenly acquired edges. Come in, he said. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, rain still damp on the shoulders of his coat, and handed Adrian a phone without a word. Adrian listened for all of 3 seconds before his eyes found mine again. This time there was no distance in his gaze at all, only decision. He ended the call and said, very calmly, Claire, Ethan's family has gone to your apartment, and they were not expecting to find it empty. For a moment, the room went completely silent, the kind of silence that does not lower itself gently but drops straight through you like a stone. My apartment. Not a penthouse. Not some glamorous address worth photographing. Just a 5th-floor walk-up on the Upper West Side with chipped white cabinets, a radiator that hissed like it had opinions, and a coffee mug on the counter that still said Bride Era in gold script because my maid of honor had thought it was funny. It was where my mail went, where my laptop was, where my life had been waiting for me to come home after the wedding. The thought of Ethan's family standing inside it, opening drawers with those polished, entitled hands, made heat flash through my chest so fast I almost swayed. They cannot do that, I said, but my voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone still trying to believe rules protected decent people. Adrian handed the phone back to the man in the suit, who disappeared as quietly as he had arrived. Then Adrian looked at me with an expression so steady it almost felt like an anchor. They already did. I took 1 step away from the window, then another, too restless to stand still. How? I asked. My doorman would never let Ethan's mother upstairs without calling me first. Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly. She did not go alone. She brought an attorney, and she claimed concern for your emotional state after what she described as a public collapse. Public collapse. I laughed once, and the sound came out brittle enough to cut glass. I left my own wedding. That is not a collapse. To men like Ethan, anything they do not control becomes a story they rewrite. I pressed my fingertips to my forehead, trying to think past the rush of anger rising under my skin. What are they looking for? Adrian answered immediately. Your passport. Financial records. The deed copy if you kept one at home. Anything that helps them move faster if they think they can pressure you before you understand what almost happened. I turned to him. They cannot pressure me if I do not speak to them. No, he said quietly. But they can try to frighten you into making mistakes. My chest tightened because that was exactly what this felt like, not heartbreak anymore, but strategy. Every tender memory I had from the last year seemed to be peeling back, revealing numbers underneath. Dinner reservations. Weekend trips. The way Ethan used to ask harmless little questions about my grandmother's taxes, whether I had refinanced, whether I had ever considered selling the Connecticut house since I hardly used it except on holidays. I had thought he was planning a future with me. He had been measuring the locks on the door. I want to go there, I said. To my apartment. Now. Adrian did not move. No. The word hit me like a wall, and this time I met it head on. You do not get to keep saying no and expect me to thank you for it. My voice rose before I could stop it. That is my home. Something flickered in his face then, quick and hard and gone again. Not anger exactly, but the shape of it disciplined into silence. And if you walk into that building now, he said, each word calm enough to be more frightening than shouting. You walk into whatever version of this they have prepared for you. Tears, lawyers, apologies, witnesses, cameras, if they are desperate enough. You will be exhausted, unsteady, and alone. That is the version of you they are hoping to meet. I hated that he was right. I hated even more that my body knew it before my pride did. I folded my arms across my chest, holding myself together by force. Then, what am I supposed to do? Hide in your library while strangers decide what my life means. Adrian took 1 step toward me. Not enough to crowd. Just enough to make me feel the gravity of his attention. No, he said. You let me remove the advantages they think they have. I looked at him, really looked, at the impossible composure, the dark eyes that never seemed to miss the exact second a lie broke apart. The man who had opened a car door for me in the rain and somehow become the only solid thing in a night built entirely from betrayal. Why? I asked again, softer this time, because the question had changed shape. Not why are you involved? Why are you this certain? Adrian held my gaze for a long beat, and when he answered, his voice was lower than before, stripped of polish, almost bare. Because when a woman has been used as leverage long enough, the first thing she loses is time. And I am done letting them steal yours. Something in me went still then, not from fear, but from recognition. No one had said it that plainly. No one had looked at the wreckage of the night and spoken to me like I was worth defending before I had proven I could survive it alone. I should have stepped back. I should have reminded myself that powerful men often wore their own kind of danger well. Instead, I stood there in borrowed clothes and morning light and felt the strangest, most reckless certainty begin to bloom beneath all the ruin. Maybe because Adrian had never once pretended to be harmless. Maybe because after a year of being lied to in soft voices, the truth sounded almost like mercy. Outside, the mist had begun to lift from the courtyard stones. Inside, the library smelled like coffee, paper, and the sharp, clean edge of decisions being made. Adrian reached for the dark folder with my name on it and closed it with one firm hand. You have two options, he said. I can send you somewhere quiet, far from Manhattan, and handle this without you. Or you stay here, beside me, and watch exactly how your life gets taken back. I should have needed time. I should have hesitated. Instead, I heard my own voice answer before fear could dress itself up as caution. I am not running. Adrian's eyes held mine, dark and intent and suddenly unreadable in a different way, like I had just stepped across a line he had expected me to avoid. Then he gave one slow nod. Good, he said, because Ethan Cole just made the mistake of assuming the rain broke you. And I would very much like to introduce him to the woman it delivered to my door.